Hi, I'm Krina Patel. I'm an artist and I teach as well. We've been working on visual memory collages. In the last episode, we worked on place, the umbrella theme of place. My friend Jim has also been working on the theme of place. He got super excited when I said to him that, would you be interested in making a collage about place? And
I said yes immediately.
And you came, and yes, immediately. And the city that you thought of immediately was?
New York City.
New York.
New York. Yeah.
Yes.
And I used to live in Connecticut, which is close to New York, so it was an obvious choice. Since it was, as growing up as a child, I had the aspirations of always visiting New York. And when I was able of at age, I went to New York and it was everything I thought it would be and more.
Oh, wow. So and that's the thing, Jim, when we start remembering something, I always say activate your senses, because if you think of New York at the time, the colors of New York, the smells, I think it's important to always sort of sit with the feelings that I evoked, because
absolutely,
if you do that, then you can, you choose the right palette of colors, or not just the right, it's nothing right or wrong, but you choose a palette that kind of evokes a memory of that experience. So
exactly, and New York was an obvious choice because the palette of New York is on a scale of 10. So any aspect of New York is a color, smell, sound.
It's all there.
It's all there, so you just have to sort of tone it down.
Yeah, in fact, you can have a color palette, a sound palette.
Yeah.
New York is so, it's such a sensory city. Like,
it is, very sensory.
So tell me what you did then.
So it was an easy...
Oh wait, did you do what I asked you to do? Did you sit down and remember all the different things?
I did.
Okay.
As soon as I thought of New York, I said, well, how am I going to represent it? I'm going to have to limit it because there's just it's too overwhelming.
Yes.
So I did make a list, like you indicated, just so I would have some kind of focus on what I was doing. So I did make a list on things that I wanted to represent.
Sorry, but one thing I did want to mention is that, I always say sit down for 10 minutes, but the 10 minutes is just a number. It could be an hour, but try not to make it 10 hours, because then you will never get down to making the collage.
It was brief. It was brief, but I also added to it later on.
Oh,
so
yes.
it wasn't just a...
It's not just the 10 minutes, Jim. That's such a good point, because it's 10 minutes to get you warmed up and started, and then you can always...
you think of things as you're going along, and you just jot them down.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So then what happened after that?
Well, then I collected visual images from magazines that were in my environment, and I separated them by color and by look. And then I also was inspired by, I couldn't find actual images of New York City, which was fine, because I created my own by cutting out images that represent New York. For example, this image of the Empire State Building.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That literally, that is not the Empire State Building, literally. It's just a picture of a cityscape, which I just cut out.
So it was just a rectangular...
it was just a piece of paper with
images of apartment buildings.
Of apartment buildings. So I just cut it out in the shape of the Empire State Building and utilized it, and it did actually look like it.
Yes, it does. I thought it was the Empire State Building, in fact.
Yeah.
Well, so that is one thing I do say, that you can either take images directly from magazines or old catalogs and use them as is, or you can take images from your personal collection and just cut them out and use them as is, or you can do what Jim did over here. He did take images. You did take images from a magazine, but then you made them your own by cutting them out into shapes you wanted.
Exactly. And then I wanted to put it right here to show the organic growth of the city coming out of the landscape.
Oh, wow.
So you could almost see the organic nature of this building growing out.
And then you did another building there, I see.
Yeah. This other building is the World Trade Center building.
The new World Trade Center.
Yeah, the new World Trade Center. And that's cut out. There's multiple images that I cut out. So it's a little more abstract, but it does the trick.
Yeah.
But that's pointing into the sky, into the brilliance of the city in itself. And then there's some others that frame.
So how did you start? Did you do the background layer like I always say?
Okay, so this is done by layers, and I started with this this first layer, which represents the geological aspect of New York City, which is based on solid rock.
Is that true? Is that is Manhattan Island
Manhattan Island
based
has
on?
a foundation of rock, so that it's easy and stable, and they're able to build tall buildings without.
Wow, I
any,
had no
any
idea.
problem.
Okay.
So that represents
Those colors do look like rocks, right? I mean, the
Yeah,
brown colors. It kind of
is,
symbolizes or references the rock formation underlying New York City.
And whatever that is, it lost whatever it was, because I don't know what that initial layer is.
Yeah, right.
I'm just taking it in the abstract and
Yeah,
using
just
it.
representing it, and then
Yes.
you took a aerial view of.
And then there was the aerial view of a city.
Mm-hmm.
It could be New York, it might not be.
But it represents a city.
But
basically.
from the aerial view,
Yeah.
it's a city.
Yeah.
And that's a very, an aspect of the city that I've always seen, because I used to fly over New York City quite often.
That's right.
So you always see the aerial view.
That's right, and that's such a treat, right? To see
Yeah,
Manhattan, especially
is,
seeing
it
Central
is.
Park from the
Yes.
air is just it's gorgeous.
And those of you who have flown over New York, the pilot usually indicates that you're flying over New York
Yes.
City, so you can see it.
That's right. That's right.
So that was exciting to do. And being as a younger person, even now, going to New York, it's just fun to still look at it.
That's right. So you did that view, and then you actually put like you said, the whole your images. You built layer upon layer. So there's a background layer, there is the bird's eye view of New York, and then you have a straight up view of Empire State Building.
Individual close-up views of the city,
Yes.
so that you're sort of in it, and it becomes a three-dimensional image.
Which is so, you really have, I remember the first time going into Manhattan from Long Island, and you do feel like you're entering a film set. It just feels like this whole three-dimensionality of the city pops up.
Yes,
and
it
that's what
is.
you have sort of evoked in this this collage. Things are the buildings look like they're popping up.
Yeah.
So you've created a 3D effect on a 2D piece of paper, which is really very interesting.
And for anyone who else is doing collages, it doesn't have to be New York City. It could be any city.
Right.
You could interpret this to be any city.
Yeah, so then you have some other... that reminds me of the Chrysler.
Yes. The Chrysler Building, for those of you who know, has a beautiful...
Art Deco kind of...
Art Deco, and the windows are shaped like these little triangles like this.
I know, and you've used that.
So I use that motif, and I just put it in here so that it looks like a starburst.
Like Broadway lights.
Yeah, Broadway lights, and some color, because New York has color.
Yes.
It has bright lights. It has dark images of
City at night.
City at night.
And I see the starry sky. You used a sort of framing, kind of, there's framing going on, some framing, not a real literal frame, but you frame parts of the picture.
I did frame it. I had to enclose the city because I wanted you to concentrate on the dimensionality of it. So I didn't want it just be frameless. It's not a strict frame, so you don't see the same border. It's not a border.
Yeah, right.
I didn't want to enclose it that way.
But it's not a border like a literal border, but there is
Correct.
some kind of a framing.
There is a frame
containing the image.
I think you could actually, the finished project could be a free frame.
But this looks like you haven't finished it. You have not glued this thing down yet.
It hasn't been finished. I have an outline of what I like and what I'm seeing here.
Yeah.
And what I've done is a photo. I've taken a photo image of what I did, and then I go back and move things around to see if I can improve or
because you took a
feel.
photo of the first time you place things.
Yes.
Then you move things around. Then you take a photo again.
Yes, and I did that a few times just to see if I could improve, see if I get a new idea, see if something looks nicer this way or that way. So it's all arrangements.
Yeah. Are you ready now? Are you ready to do
I think I'm ready because, after you do this, it's exciting to see the different things you come up with.
Yes, the different ways you can arrange, or different ways. You know what? I'm glad you said that, Jim, because this is a great time to talk about some of the visual elements, right?
Yes.
So I see that the visual element of lines. You've arranged. This is a line. There's a line here, a line of buildings here, a line of the Empire State Building here, and then lines here. then I see the way you've sort of integrated the lines and the shapes. So
Shapes, yes.
lines, basic visual element, shape,
Shapes.
another basic visual
Yeah.
element. The colors, the third main
Colors,
visual
the
element.
composition, yeah.
That. And then how do you bring the lines, the shapes, the colors, the patterns? You see patterns also, right?
Yes.
There's an obvious pattern up here, but how you bring all that together into a composition?
Exactly. I think I tend to like to blend lines and shapes so
Yeah.
that you get a flow of the
Yeah, you get a rhythm to it.
rhythm
a rhythm
to
to
it,
the
so-
visual rhythm, as they
yeah.
say.
So there's no strict cutoffs.
That's right, and that's a different composition. Like the
Different
Montreal.
composition.
This is just like
It is.
It's a rhythmic composition. Things are floating in
Right.
and out, and evoking the feeling you had when you remember New York, or you remember New
yes.
York, right?
Yeah, it's a little
That's-
more organic.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
It doesn't mean that's the only technique you could use.
No.
You could use all different types
Yeah.
of technique.
That's
No.
right. And so basically, you matched your memories of New York with the basics of visual design and brought it together to make, as you said, an organic, dynamic
Exactly.
composition, which is
Exactly.
still not done because you want
Still
to go.
not done because it's
Yeah.
going to be consolidated and it's going to be glued.
Yeah,
And
it
there
looks
may
good.
be further changes. I don't know for sure,
Yeah,
but
that's-
it will happen.
It'll happen.
But I'm confident that whatever happens will work out okay because it's almost at the end point.
That's right, and I also think
So it's
that's
a
the beauty.
process.
Yeah,
It's
it's
a
a process.
process. Yeah.
And that's the beauty of collage, right? Because you can, it's a forgiving medium, but at the same time, it's also a limiting medium. I love that the tension between the structure and the freedom that you get in making
Exactly.
a collage. Yeah.
And it's actually a very fun process too.
It really is. So I know that you had so much fun that you decided to carry on and you
I did.
and you
I
did a
just-
second city.
I decided to go with Boston.
Oh,
Why not?
wow.
I live in Boston. I might as well represent Boston also. But Boston, as everyone knows, has a different flavor. So.
Right. So I'm really excited to see what you did about Boston, and I want to share. I've been working on my own memory of Calcutta.
Yes, and that's a whole different scene.
Yes, and a whole different world over there.
A whole different
and
world.
Yes, and what I did was I actually made a list. I wrote down the list, and this is just the first few things that came up in the 10 minutes.
Okay,
but I
so
had
that is your list, yeah?
some of it. But I talked quite a bit about it in the last episode. In this episode, I would love to show you and them the final. This was
I like the way you actually sketched out some
yes.
of the
You did
things
not sketch out yours.
I didn't sketch.
Yeah,
so,
that's-
I mean, there's a technique right there,
Yeah,
sketching.
sometimes, and this is the first time I sketched it because
yeah.
usually I do what you do. I just
okay.
take the images and put them on a surface. And I noticed you followed the instruction about using a stronger paper than the paper
Yes,
cutouts.
and I don't know if this is going to be the final.
Oh,
of
right, you
that.
might use a different-
I might use
this just a-
something a little more substantial.
Yes, because otherwise the warping might have happened.
Yeah,
Just a laying
it's good
out.
to have something to lay the
Layer, yeah,
size,
yeah.
so you get the size
Right.
correct. Yeah.
So I do what you do, but this time I decided to sketch it.
Okay.
And I sketched it, and like you, you cut out shapes from magazine images that you found. What I did was I cut out shapes from paper that I had created. I usually, I've shown in the previous episode, I showed paper that I had created, different
Yes,
colored paper, just
yes.
pouring paint over paper,
Okay.
acrylic paint over paper, and just brushing it so that I get the texture. And
then you created images. From
I
that.
created cutouts. Yes, and this is
Okay.
the image of a shell. So I created cutouts from paper that I had made.
Okay.
And that's another way of
That's a very interesting way because you're actually creating from the beginning.
yes, you're not using images.
You're not using anything that.
Yeah.
You're making the images.
You're making the images.
And then abstracting them into a collage.
That's right. Yes,
Yeah.
it's a different
So
different
that's
way.
a whole different way of doing
Yeah.
it, and I like that.
Yeah, and I think yours is kind of a mix of representation and symbolism.
It
Whereas
is.
mine is going to be very abstract.
A little more
You'll
abstract,
see, yeah,
yes.
yeah. So now you want to show us your Boston collage?
I could do that, of course.
Yeah. Listen, I'm really excited because this looks very different from your New York City
Well-
collage. This is the one about Boston. Tell me more.
Well, Boston is very different than New York.
But they're both cities, right?
Yeah, they're both cities, and they're quite, in a sense, they come from the same history, but they're
Yes.
quite different.
Very different. And Boston also has such a, I see the redcoats, so it has such a history.
The history was an aspect when I was thinking of a collage. Of course, Boston, you think of history. I mean, New York has plenty of history, but Boston has history that is the city is based upon, and the image of our city is the old and the new. And especially at this time, Boston is a booming new city, but it still maintains its old flavor in architecture and attitude.
But you know what I like, what I love about this?
Yeah.
Not that I love it so much as I'm just very, very curious about how you decided to show no apartment buildings at all. And you did mention just now that Boston has this whole new, the
True.
seaport and the modern flavor, but you went with the history of Boston.
I did. I went with some history, but I went with a lot of abstraction.
Oh, I see.
And a lot of it is my interpretation.
I see. Tell me more.
And overall, it's the theme of this collage is the old and the new. So I decided to represent Boston as an old city, and then looking forward into the newness of the new eras coming up.
The hopes,
The hopes and the dreams and it's kind of abstract only because the new era, the old era, you get the flavor
Definitely.
of the colors,
Yes.
the old paper,
The stained glass.
the stained glass, the historic Boston
Event.
Massacre
Yeah.
represented here.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's peeled away and you're going into the woods of the new era. And there's even some playful images like a unicorn. So you're getting some fanciful images of New York because the imagination here is thriving. We have a lot of high-tech industries. We have a lot of newness, but it's embedded with our oldness.
So you know what's really fascinating to me, Jim, is how this collage is so different in style from the New York collage,
It
but
is
yet
different.
you can see that there is a similarity. Like you've not shown any apartment buildings here.
I know.
Yeah, but and that's true of Boston because if you think of the south, some areas of the South End, the brownstones, and it's such a historic city, and you're right about you go. It sort of peel away the history, and you think, and you look to the future, and all the exciting things that are happening here, and sort of the unknown,
The unknown, yes.
And the woods signify that.
And I didn't want to continue with the same imagery of New York City. I had my full with that.
Yeah.
It's very nice. I enjoy it, and I would even revisit that.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to approach Boston in a different way.
Yeah.
So, like you approached yours,
Yes.
this is a little more abstract.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's part of the process.
And
of
in
doing
abstract
collages.
also, I love because I've talked in the previous episodes about matching your memory with images that are representational, that are symbolic, and abstract, and also combining all three. And I'm just really fascinated by the fact that you've combined all three here. So you have the very representational, the history of Boston, the redcoats, the Boston Massacre, and then you have the symbolic, the stained glass window that symbolizes, the history that is Boston. So there is representation, symbolism, and there is abstraction here about the future of Boston.
Exactly. So abstract is an abstract term. So you could actually read the abstraction in here. You could feel the history. At least that's the way I wanted to represent it. I wanted to have some representational. I wanted to have the color, the old brick and parchment colors.
I'm glad you mentioned colors because the other, that brings up the topic of, that leads into really the discussion about visual elements, the elements of visual design. And I noticed that in this one, you actually have, you've used this, you're not playing around here, you actually stuck your elements down.
This is actually a border.
And there's a border, there is a border all around that you made.
And that actually comes into the abstraction of the city. We are a city with borders, not only our neighborhoods, but the city itself is a border, and it also represents almost like a document, a parchment document, a document of Boston, because Boston is represented as a historic, documented history.
And you've used the brown, the surface that you've stuck this on is also brown parchment like,
exactly,
to give that
so
tone.
it's sort of it's a softer tone. It doesn't have the
Whiteness,
pizzazz like
yeah.
New York City.
Yeah.
It has its own character.
Yeah.
And so that's my image of Boston at this point.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
It's different, very different from what I mean, I also have been in Boston now for more than 2 decades, and I'm telling you, Jim, I would approach it very differently.
That's the beauty of doing this.
That's the beauty of doing collages.
That is the beauty of doing it.
Everyone does it differently, and
Yeah.
everyone has a reason. You know what? I do want to mention one thing. The border. You said, like, it's. I always say, frame your work, but it doesn't have to be a literal border. So, our friend Petra, she did 2 different pieces.
I noticed, yes.
And she did in one, she did an actual border.
Actual border.
And then in the second one, she did it.
Yes,
And you know
exactly.
what I did notice also, Jim, when you spoke about New York and when you spoke about Boston, it was very different. The feeling tone for both the places were very different. Because
Yes.
it was almost playful when you spoke about New York.
And as you bring up, it's the memory of the city.
That's right. And with Boston, there was a more somber tone. Here's where you spent your adulthood.
Yes.
Whereas New York was a playing ground.
Yes.
And this is the place where New York was the grounds you played in.
Yeah.
When you came of age, and then you came to Boston and started your work life and your professional life, and that reflects.
Boston's a little more stoic than New York.
That's
yes.
right. That's right.
Absolutely.
So are you now excited to see what I came up with?
I am, and I know it's going to be a whole different universe.
It's going to be a whole different, literally and metaphorically and symbolically, because literally it's on the other side of the world. I made a collage about Calcutta. I decided that I was going to use, so I have my list of things I remember about my city. And, I also have a long list.
Okay, so that was your list.
I did a list, yes.
Yeah.
I actually did. I write, I remember, and then I did a list.
Very good, okay.
And then I picked a few things from there. And one of the things I do remember about Calcutta is the shells. They blow on the shells.
Oh, yes.
The conch shells in the evening.
I'm familiar with that.
I've mentioned it to you. So what I did was I used the shell as a frame on the side.
Got it.
This is a sketch of what I was going to do.
Very nice, very nice.
In the final, I did use that. So you don't see a literal border, but you see.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little. It has some abstraction in there.
Yeah. And technique-wise, also, you'll be very surprised.
This is exciting to see because there's so many directions you could go with collages.
That's right. It is. And so I used a digital. I combined traditional with digital. I used the paper cutouts that I had made. I'd colored the papers myself.
Okay.
I cut them out. I scanned them in.
Oh.
And I actually made it in Photoshop.
This is exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how I did
You have
mine.
unlimited resources there.
We do. In
Whatever
collage.
you want to create.
That's right. And because you can do traditional, modern, you can mix up everything together, blend everything in. So that was fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's good.